The Travels and Adventures of Little Baron Trump and His Wonderful Dog Bulger. Chapter 7, Part 9. The effect of all this was to throw the beautiful Princess Hoppa Hoppa into deep melancholy. In fact, she refused absolutely to partake of any food for so long a while that everybody said sadly, "She will die." King Guru was beside himself with grief. But as Megazalto had no blood, he couldn't feel any pity for either father or daughter, and insisted that the king should stick to his bargain with him. Led on at last by the rich reward offered by King Guru to any physician who could succeed in making Princess Hoppa Hoppa partake of food, one of the court physicians hit upon the following plan. The attendants were directed to set a table in the princess's apartment and load it down with her favorite dishes. Then the lady-in-waiting was instructed to bind a silk band around the Princess Hoppa Hoppa's body when the latter retired for the night, so arranged that it should press gently but continuously on the sympathetic nerve and cause her to walk in her sleep. The plan worked successfully. Every night about midnight, Princess Hoppa Hoppa would rise from her bed while in the deepest sleep, sit down at the table, and partake of a hearty meal. After which she returned to bed, when one of the ladies of the bedchamber immediately loosened the silken band, lest she might arise a second time and overeat herself. Princess Hoppa Hoppa advanced towards me, hopping along with a timid air until she was close enough to get a good look at me. I was then desired to go through my paces once more, which I did with a great deal of vigor, concluding the performance by sitting down and crossing my legs. Hoppa Hoppa smiled faintly at first, but when it came to the leg-crossing feat, she clapped her little doll hands and broke out in a laugh about as loud as the low notes of a flute. King Guru was crazed with joy. It was the first time Hoppa Hoppa had laughed for a year. I could see that there was a hurried consultation going on between King Guru and his fat and lean ministers. I knew only too well what it all meant. But Princess Hoppa Hoppa interrupted the consultation and solved the whole question herself by crying out like a spoilt child clamoring for a toy. "I want him." King Guru burst forth into a loud laugh, in which everyone joined, save the lean, rattle-jointed Megazalto, who scowled fiercely at me, screwing up his little face like a dried apple. "He is thine. Take him, beloved daughter," exclaimed King Guru gaily, "and if he can cure thy melancholy and make thee once more the joy and sunshine of our court, no one of the glorious gems which deck our royal diadem shall be too good for him." Amid great rejoicing and loud huzzas, a silk cord was tied about my body, and I was led away by the beautiful Princess Hoppa Hoppa. Bulger resented the indignity of tying a cord around my waist, and came within an ace of setting his teeth in the thick leg of the attendant who performed that service for me. Growling and showing his teeth right and left, the poor puzzled animal followed me to prison. I say to prison, for that was what it proved to be. Night and day a guard surrounded my apartments and kept within respectful distance when I was summoned to divert the gentle princess by running, hopping on one foot, walking with my toes turned out or in, or with my feet stretched far apart. But the one thing which delighted the princess and chased the melancholy from the pretty doll face was my ability to cross my legs. This wonderful feat I was obliged to repeat and repeat until my limbs fairly ached. But no matter how often repeated to the gentle Hoppa Hoppa, it was ever new and wonderful, and she invariably rewarded me by smiling and clapping her baby hands. About this time it was that my beloved Bulger gave me another proof of his deep affection and most extraordinary intelligence. I had no sooner begun to prepare for bed when I noticed that something was the matter with him. He fixed his lustrous black eyes pleadingly upon me, bit my shoe playfully, tugged at my clothing, sprang upon me, then bounded off toward the bed, sniffed at it, growled in an unfeigned anger, and then, making his way back to me, began to tease and worry me once more. I was half inclined to get provoked. By turns, I scolded and petted him. All to no purpose, he continued his strange actions, growling, if anything, more and more violently in his manner. At last, I was ready for bed. Striving with all my power to quiet and console him, I made an effort to throw myself on my bed so that he might leap up and lie down beside me. But no, it was impossible. With grip of iron, he laid hold of my nightrobe and held me firmly fast, whining and crying most piteously, as if to say, "O loved little master, why is it that thou canst not understand me?" Suddenly, a strange thought crossed my mind. I stooped and glanced under my couch. Nothing seemed amiss. Then, as if urged by some unseen hand, I seized the bed-clothing and hurled it on the floor. Lo, the mystery was solved. There, hidden beneath the drapery, shone the tips of a dozen or more tiny blades, each sharper than a needle's point, and as I found upon examination, stained with a poison so subtle that the slightest prick would have robbed me of life. Need that I tell you how the tears burst forth, how I flung myself upon my knees and caught that beloved animal in my arms, covering him with kisses? He was satisfied. Again, had he added to that long list of debts due from him, debts only to be discharged in coin fresh and bright from the heart's meant. As you have doubtless guessed, this cowardly and cruel attempt on my life was the work of that living coil of steel springs, Megazalto, who had determined to put out of the way the hated foreigner whose monstrous deformities were so pleasing to the being he loved. King Guru was greatly incensed when, upon Bulger's recognition of the would-be murderer in the presence of the whole court, the miserable wretch made a clean breast of it, and related how he had arranged the knives with his own hands. "Out of my sight, thou unworthy servant! If I do not command that thy vile heart and viler head be parted by the executioner's axe, it is because thy father rendered mine priceless service. Go, come not again until I summon thee." King Guru now took me into special favor. In the first place, he was delighted to see how successful my efforts had been to amuse the Princess Hapa Hapa, on whose baby cheeks the roses glowed once more, and whose child voice rang out again, as of old, like a flute note or a tiny silver bell. His Majesty ordered that the court painter should forthwith make a portrait of Bulger for the royal gallery, and that a plaster cast of my head should be taken for the royal museum. I was much pleased with all this attention, but I noticed that the very moment I hinted at the necessity of my speedy return home, King Guru skillfully turned the conversation to some other subject. The fact of the matter was, he feared to have me leave the palace, lest his beloved Hapa Hapa should miss my daily performances and fall back again into her melancholy. The little princess herself was not slow in exerting her power over me. Stamping the ground with her feet like a rabbit, when I failed to be quite as entertaining as usual, and even going so far as to threaten me with a dose of the living coil of steel spring called Megazalto, when I refused to cross my legs and uncross them quickly enough to please her ladyship. One day, being in a sort of brown study over my position, and resolving in my mind several different ways to make my escape from King Guru's dominions, I unwittingly paid little attention to Hapa Hapa's commands. In vain she stormed, stamping the ground with her little feet, shaking her baby hands at me, piping out in shrill and angry tones at my negligence. I didn't quicken my pace one jot. A heavy load of thoughts oppressed my mind. My heart was full of sorrow. All that day I'd been thinking of home, of the dear old Baron and the gentle Baroness, my mother, and wondering whether they missed me at the castle. Suddenly came a messenger from King Garoo, summoning me at once to go to the audience chamber. With a bound I came to myself. The little princess, Hoppa Hoppa, had gone to her apartments. I started to call her back. Every instant I expected to hear that little bundle of bones and malevolence jump out at me like a venomous toad. With fear and trembling, I betook me to the king's chamber. To my unspeakable delight, His Majesty, the ruler of the Umilumbas, was in the rosiest of humors. He met me with outstretched hands, poured out a beaker of wine for me, and bade me sit down at the very foot of the throne. I strove in vain to stammer out my thanks. He would not hear a word of them, said that the stream should flow the other way, meaning that I was the one to be thanked. "Now, little man all head," began the king, after I'd finished my wine, "I have sent for thee to try and make thee happy, in the same measure that thou hast contributed to my happiness. This day I speak to thee from a father's heart. Thou hast restored my darling child to health and contentment, and remembering from my conversations with thee that thou art a great lover of rare and useful books, I have had copies made of every book on the shelves of the royal library, and now beg thee to accept them as a very slight token of my gratitude." I was speechless. The blood rushed fast and hot to my cheeks. I stammered out a few senseless words of protest, thanks, surprise, and what not. The plan seemed to me only too plainly a scheme to tie me in King Garoo's service, to load me with several thousand volumes, which I would have no possible means of carrying with me, and which to leave behind would be such an insult that arrest and imprisonment would most surely follow. At last I succeeded in getting myself together in some shape, and spake as follows. "O most powerful, wonderful, and graceful jumper of all the Umilumbas, Garoo, thousandth of thy line, I implore thee, do not load me down with such a vast and priceless treasure. Thou knowest I am but a brief sojourner for a brief term in thy kingdom. I have no caravan. When I go hence to transport this vast accumulation of wisdom, stored in so many thousands of thick and bulky volumes, steel-clasped and iron-hinged. Thy gift is far too princely for so humble a visitor as I. Therefore, most gracious King Garoo, bestow it upon some wealthy noble of thy land, in whose spacious castle halls these books may find a safe resting place, shelf rising on shelf, a very fortress of learning, impregnable to the cohorts of ignorance." King Garoo smiled. Then, turning to an attendant, he said, "Summon Palidatta to attend before me, and bid him bring the library with him." I was more puzzled than ever by this command. And we're going to pause here, and we'll continue with this story in the next video. Please like, subscribe, leave a comment below. Thank you for watching. I love you guys. As Tigger says, ta-ta for now.